Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm doing the mid-year book freakout tag. So I'm not sure who this tag was created by. I will link their video or channel down below if I can find it. I believe the original video might have been taken down, as some people have mentioned that in recent mid-year book freakout tag videos. This is actually my third time filming this because my camera audio has been really wonky. I think it fixed itself, at least so far as I've been testing it. It looks like it has, so hopefully it has and we won't have any problems. I am filming outside, so you'll probably hear cars, birds, things like that. I'll try to talk over it, and if there's anything loud, I'll take a break, but I'm not always able to be outside, so I'm taking this opportunity. Also, I just finished filming another video, and it was not nearly this windy when I filmed that one, so I don't really know what happened in the 10 seconds I was inside, but it's a little windy, so hopefully that doesn't cause a problem either. But anyway, let's just get into these questions. So the first question is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And that has to be Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. I love this book so much. It's now one of my most favorite books of all time. I am so glad I picked this up. I really wasn't expecting to love this as much as I did because I had read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, and I'd heard that this is a little slower. And a lot of the time when people say like, oh, it's a sweet, cute, slower story, I usually end up not liking it. But this one I just loved, and I think a huge part of that is definitely my connection to Agnes Grey as a character. I felt very seen reading her from her perspective, as the way she thinks and the way she sees the world, the way she reacts to certain things really is very similar to the way I react and see the world, and so I just absolutely loved reading about her, and this is one I'm going to come back to so many times. I loved it so much. I loved the relationship she had, even though it wasn't a guy who was like necessarily like super standout, charming, or anything like that. He just was a very sweet, gentle guy, and I love those guys in books so much. Like, he just had such a generous personality, and I just loved that about him, and I loved the way they were able to bond over how much they care about other people, and I just love that sort of relationship where they're just good people, and I feel like we don't see that a ton in a lot of fiction. At least I don't see it very much, and so I just loved it. And again, it's a very simple story. It's not one everybody's going to love. It was definitely a personal thing for me to love it as much as I did, but I'm so glad I read this. I'm so grateful that this was written, and I recommend it to anyone who's willing to give it a try, although I won't necessarily say that everybody's gonna love it. Next is best sequel I've read so far, and I've only read a few sequels this year. I'm just not in the middle of very many series. I kind of struggled recently to want to get into series, especially because I feel like if I start a series, then I end up having to purchase the whole series, which I don't necessarily have to do that, but I just feel like I do to have the matching set, and it just ends up being a lot of money sometimes to read series, and so I just have been preferring standalones. Plus I kind of just like to be like done with the story and move on and just have a couple like series that I'm reading. So anyway, I've only had 3 sequels that I've read this year, and this one that I've chosen is technically a prequel. Just by that you probably can guess what it is, but that is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I really enjoyed this. I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars, maybe I might say 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is a prequel to the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins, which is very popular. If you don't, for some reason, know what that's about, essentially it's a dystopian world where there are 12 districts and then the capital, and because of a war that happened a little over 70 years before the Hunger Games begins, each year the districts are punished for this war by having to sacrifice one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 17, I believe, who have to fight in the Hunger Games, which is a fight to the death, and the last one standing is the winner. It's very brutal and intense, and so this is a prequel following the later President Snow in the Hunger Games series, who is the villain of the story. And it was very, very well written. I really liked the exploration of society. I liked the exploration of Coriolanus Snow as a character and understanding his personality and his reasons behind doing what he does in the Hunger Games, because they're not really what I expected them to be. It was just very, very interesting. It's definitely a very slow book, and the reason why it wasn't like higher than 3 stars for me is because I felt like it could have been shorter. I really liked it, however, overall, as I said, and it's one that I definitely think I will revisit in the future, particularly as I didn't reread The Hunger Games before reading this. I think it will be fun to reread The Hunger Games at some point when I'm a little more in the mood for it than I have been recently. And then read this again. Okay, sorry if the angle changed, my camera just flew over, so hopefully it doesn't do that again. But anyway, yeah, I just want to get a better sense of how the events in this book potentially affected the events in the Hunger Games series. Okay, next is a new release you want to read. So the first one, I have 2 that I want to mention for this question. The first is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This follows a young girl who had a relationship with her teacher when she was younger, and at the time it felt very romantic, but as years go by and this teacher ends up going to court for inappropriate relationships with some other students, she starts to think about her past and realize that maybe her relationship with her teacher wasn't as romantic as she thought. I've heard that this book handles this subject matter very, very well, and it's a subject matter that, although it's really hard to read, I really find a lot of fascination with it, and just understanding the psychology behind these situations. That makes it sound kind of strange, but I am studying psychology, and something I really am considering doing is having a focus on helping people who have been in abusive relationships or have suffered traumatic abuse in any form, both children and women and men. Possibly I'll focus more on children, but I still really want to help those who have been in those situations, and so reading books about it that handled the subject matter very well, I really enjoy. I don't know if I'd say enjoy, that might not be the right word, but I do find an interest in it, and I appreciate the perspective it gives me. The other one I really want to read is My Calamity Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. I have read the first 2 books in this companion series, My Lady Jane and My Plain Jane, and have really, really loved them. This series follows different Janes throughout history and adds a sort of supernatural element to their stories. My Calamity Jane specifically follows Calamity Jane, who was a figure in the Wild West, and it adds werewolves into the story, and so I'm really, really excited to read this whenever I can get my hands on it. Next is most anticipated release, and I have 2 for this one as well. The first is Tsarina by Ellen Alpsten. This is a book, a historical fiction story following Catherine I, who I know nothing about, and I'm so excited to get a little introduction to her through this book. It comes out in October, and I'm hoping to read it very soon. If you saw my Bookopoly TBR for July and August, you probably would have seen that I am planning to read this in the next couple of months, but I am really excited to pick this up. I think it's going to be a great read. I mean, the tagline on the front says Surf Murderous Empress, and that just in and of itself wins me over. These are my favorite historical fictions, the political type, more medieval Renaissance era, and even like up through early 1900s kind of time period stories are my favorite historical fiction. So very excited to pick this up. The other one I'm really excited for is Stormlight Archive Book 4 by Brandon Sanderson. I love this series so much. It's one of my favorites. I've read the first 3 obviously, and so I've just been on the edge of my seat waiting for book 4 to come out, and it should come out in November, I believe. So very excited about that. I don't know when I'm going to buy it because they're very expensive books when they first come out, because they come out in hardcover obviously, and they're huge and adult, and so they're like $30, and I'm a poor college student, but I also have been collecting them in hardcover, so I'd kind of like to continue that, so I have no idea, but I'm going to get my hands on it as soon as possible. Next is Biggest Disappointment, and for this one I have to go with Hester by Margaret Oliphant. This is a book, I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, so not horrible. I was just expecting more from it. I had heard good things, but it just didn't, it was very boring to me, in my opinion. This starts off with a family called the Vernons who own this great successful bank. However, at one point it almost is run into ruin because of the man running it. He just wasn't a very good businessman. And so his cousin, Catherine, a woman, ends up coming in and saving the bank, and he ends up running away with his wife, France, and Catherine is left to take care of the bank the rest of the time. She's very successful at it. However, eventually her cousin, this man, ends up passing away, and she provides a home for his wife and their daughter, who she's never met, named Hester. And these two kind of get off on the wrong foot and are very, very similar, but both very hard-headed and stubborn. And so things kind of go on from there. It's a really, really great... There are very interesting characters in here that I love to analyze. However, the plot itself was very boring. I don't really remember many specific events that occurred that really held my interest. And even the ending, though it was interesting, wasn't overly entertaining for me, I guess. I was just very bored, like I said, and so I was expecting to love this a lot more than I did. But I am still open to reading more by Margaret Oliphant. I just don't know when. But yeah, this was just a disappointing read. Next is Biggest Surprise, and for that I have to go with probably my second favorite for the year, and that is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which I ended up giving 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. The reason why it was a surprise is because when I first learned about it, it was in my junior year of high school. I was taking an AP literature course, and in that course we had this long list of books that potentially we want to read in order to prepare for the test. And my teacher early on in that class went through the list and discussed all the ones she had read or had at least heard about and what they were about, so that we had an idea of what books to potentially read. She said she had read this, and she described it as kind of like a soap opera-y, dramatic story that was just really fun, really great to read. And so because of that, I ended up picking it up. I picked up this copy as a potential, I might read this if I get the chance. I did not, however, get the chance in that year. But I kept it because I felt like eventually I'd really want to read it. And then years went by, didn't read it, but I kept keeping it because I felt like I would probably like it. And then finally, last year, Lucy from Lucy the Reader read it and absolutely adored it. And then my dad actually ended up downloading it without my knowledge, without knowing I would want to read it anyway, on Audible, because it was an option for a free audiobook that you could get on there for whatever sale they had or whatever. So he ended up downloading it, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to listen to the audiobook. I have wanted to read this for so long, and we're just gonna give this a shot. So I started it, and I just fell in love with it so fast. I loved the characters, and what surprised me about it, because like I said, I always expected to enjoy it, but because my teacher described it as more soap opera-y, I was expecting it to just be more lighthearted and fun, but it ended up having a lot more depth to it than I was expecting. A lot of deep discussion about marriage and society's expectations and how they were changing between the Victorian time period and the early 1900s. I guess I should explain what this is about. This book is set in New York during the late 1800s primarily, and there's this man named Newland Archer who is engaged to be married to this beautiful girl. However, her cousin, who's an older woman, Ellen Olenska, comes into town, and he finds himself being very drawn to her, very fascinated by her, and things kind of go on from there. It's just a very, very interesting story, and I really liked a lot of what it had to say. So yeah, it just surprised me by its depth primarily, because I really wasn't expecting it to have so much depth, but it was amazing, and I definitely will be reading more by Edith Wharton in the future. Next question is favorite new author, and for this I have to go with someone who I haven't actually finished a book by them yet, but I already am so in love with the writing. I really hope you guys can hear me because this wind is picking up so much and I don't know why. Anyway, the author I want to say as my new favorite is Alexandre Dumas. I am currently reading The Count of Monte Cristo by him, and I'm just loving it so much, and I really feel like I love everything he has to write. Even though it's translated and so I don't really get his specific authorial voice, I really feel like I am getting a good idea of his voice as an author, and the way he paces his plots I'm already falling in love with, especially because The Count of Monte Cristo is so huge and I'm not bored at all yet, and the plot just keeps moving very, very well. I'm loving it so much, and so I definitely will be reading more by him in the future, and I recommend reading The Count of Monte Cristo if you have any interest at all. I know it's really big and so that's very intimidating, but honestly the plot is paced so well that you don't ever get bored, and it's just so good. I love it so much. Question number 8 is newest fictional crush, and I feel like a lot of people have the same sort of answer for this as I do, which is I don't really have a lot of fictional crushes. I'm more into like seeing people get together in books and seeing their relationship dynamics and whether I approve of those. That sounds so self-righteous and condescending. Whether I like the relationship itself. But there is one guy in one of the books I actually reread that I already knew I liked him, but it really solidified my fictional crush on him, and that is Mr. Knightley from Emma by Jane Austen. I just love Mr. Knightley. He's my favorite Jane Austen hero that I've read about, even more than Mr. Darcy. I just love Mr. Knightley. I just feel like he's a very sweet, kind person, and like I mentioned with Agnes Grey, I just like those guys that are just very generous and kind. But I also like that Mr. Knightley has a little bit more of a strong will to him than the guy in Agnes Grey. I don't even remember his name. But anyway, I just really like Mr. Knightley. I think he's a great guy. I know a lot of people have issues with the age difference between him and Emma, which I can understand, but I also still like their relationship dynamics overall. Then we have newest favorite character, and for this I have to go with Margaret Schlegel from Howard's End by EM Forster. I really had mixed emotions about this book. There was just something about it that kept me at arm's length from really liking it, but I did overall love the characters and the plot. I think it was just mostly something about the writing just did not work with me, but Margaret Schlegel I loved as a character. I just liked the way that she was a strong, independent, intelligent, wise, kind woman who also wasn't overly judgmental about people's opinions that were different from her own. She comes across as very willing to admit her faults, very willing to open her mind to new opinions, even if she doesn't agree with them. She is very aware of when it's time to argue a point and when it's time not to. And that's really hard to do. It's a very difficult character trait to have, and I don't think she did it necessarily perfectly. I do feel like there were times she should have spoken up a little bit more, but overall I felt like she was very good at recognizing when it was time to keep quiet and when it was time to say something. And that's, I just love it so much. I loved seeing her dynamics with other people, especially compared to her sister, who I did not like as much. I think it's Helen is her sister's name, but Helen tended to be like, she just wanted to fight her point all the time. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't share your opinion or anything like that. I think it's just about timing and recognizing when it's going to be effective and when it needs to be said, or when in this context we're trying to figure out other things and there are other things that are more important, like showing kindness, showing respect, and I can fight my point later. And I just felt like Margaret was very good at handling those situations, and I really looked up to her, to be quite honest, in this book. I'm not saying she's perfect. Again, I feel like there were times that she should have spoken up that she didn't, but overall I really liked her wisdom and her intelligence and her openness to new ideas. Okay, a book that made me cry, I have to go with Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This book follows two perspectives, one in present day and the other back during the 30s, I want to say. And it is the story of Georgia Tann, who ran the Tennessee Children's Home Society, something like that, wherein a lot of children were kidnapped from their parents. A lot of children were placed in these homes by parents who were planning to come back and pick them up. They didn't want them adopted out, but they just wanted to have their children there to be taken care of while they went off and figured out their own lives, and then they would come back. However, she would adopt those children out anyway. There was a lot of blackmail to parents who had already adopted children through this society, who were blackmailed into paying more and more money by Georgia Tann, and it was just a really horrible situation. The children in these homes were abused in all sorts of different ways, malnourished. It was just horrible situation. So of course, because it's about that, there was one scene, one portion that in particular that really made me cry. It was heartbreaking, but it was still one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I loved it so much. It was worth a read because I really didn't know a lot about this whole situation. It was definitely a devastating story. Number 11, a book that made me laugh, and for this I'm going with A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. This is technically a play, but I did read it this year and I absolutely loved it. Definitely one of my new favorite comedies by Shakespeare. and I highly recommend it. Definitely recommend as a good starting place for Shakespeare if you're interested in reading more about him, but it definitely made me laugh out loud. The second to last question is the most beautiful book I've purchased or received, and for that I'm going with The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. This is just a beautiful collector's edition from Barnes & Noble. It has beautiful end papers, just the silver, gold, and black look is so nice. I've read part of this in a class before, and I actually picked up this copy because I wanted to read more of it because I really did enjoy what it had to say. I didn't necessarily agree with all of it, but I did see the value in a lot of the philosophies that Niccolò Machiavelli shares in this, but this particular copy is just gorgeous and I love looking at it on my bookshelves. I just love it so much. I just love the Barnes & Noble collector's editions so much. And the last question is a book that you need to read before the end of the year, and I could name so many books that I would like to read before the end of the year, but I think I'm just going to mention for Victober, I really want to read or listen to on audiobook a longer Victorian classic, and so I have two options that I am debating between. I'm waiting to see what the prompts for the readathon are and see if one of those prompts works with one of these books, but, ooh, that was a nice wind gust right there. Anyway, those two books are The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope and Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. One of these will be read by the end of the year. I don't know which one, but we'll just wait and see what happens for Victober. But I am really excited to pick one of these up. Charles Dickens has always been pretty intimidating to me, as I've mentioned before, but Our Mutual Friend I've heard really good things about and I'm excited to pick this up. And then I really just want to read an Anthony Trollope, and I've heard that this is a good place to start with him, so I would love to pick this up whenever I get a chance, but we'll see which one I end up picking up by the end of the year. It would be awesome if I could read both, but I really doubt that's gonna happen. Anyway, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below some of your favorite books that you've read this year, and most disappointing if you have any, as I would love to know, as well as if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were on them. And I will talk to you next week. Bye!